Richard Huckle. On October 13, 2019, at HMP Full Sutton, one of the UK's most reviled pedophiles was killed in a grotesque attack that lasted more than an hour. Richard Huckle, a 33-year-old photographer convicted of abusing as many as 200 children in Malaysia, was murdered in his cell by fellow inmate Paul Fitzgerald, 30. The assault, fueled by both vigilante rage and sadistic fantasy, left even hardened investigators shaken. Huckle had been sentenced in 2016 to 22 life sentences after being caught with thousands of images documenting his crimes, many shared on the dark web. He bragged about his abuse in a so-called PETA-points ledger and masqueraded as a Christian volunteer to gain access to children. His name became a shorthand for the worst kind of predator. Fitzgerald, however, was no ordinary inmate. He had a long record of violent sexual offenses, beginning in adolescence, and was serving an indeterminate sentence under the UK's imprisonment for public protection system. Diagnosed with psychopathy and personality disorders, Fitzgerald harbored violent fantasies. Intelligence reports flagged his danger repeatedly, yet he was still housed near Huckle in a vulnerable prisoner unit. That morning, Fitzgerald entered Huckle's cell armed with makeshift weapons, a ligature made from underwear, a toothbrush sharpened into a blade, and even a spoon. Over 78 minutes, he strangled, stabbed, abused, and mutilated Huckle. He shoved a pen into his brain, inserted a spoon into his rectum, and battered him until he was unrecognizable. When guards finally found the scene, Fitzgerald calmly confessed, later telling investigators he had wanted to cook and eat parts of Huckle's body, but ran out of time. In 2020, Fitzgerald was convicted of murder and sentenced to life with a 34-year minimum term. He laughed during sentencing, showing no remorse. A 2024 prison ombudsman report concluded that officials had ignored warnings and failed to manage his escalating threats. Public reaction was blunt. Few mourned Huckle. On X, many called the killing poetic justice. Yet for prison authorities, the incident underscored a dangerous truth, that even vulnerable prisoner units could not protect the most hated offenders from those willing to become executioners. While Richard Huckle's death was called poetic justice after his sadistic crimes in Malaysia, the next case involves a child killer whose end came after 40 minutes of torture inside his own cell. Subhan Anwar. On February 15, 2013, 23-year-old Subhan Anwar, one of the UK's most reviled child killers, was found strangled in his cell at HMP Long Lartin. Two fellow prisoners, Michael Parr and Nathan Mann, both lifers with long histories of violence, admitted to the killing almost immediately. For them, the reason was simple. Anwar was a nonce, prison slang for a child abuser, and they had decided he didn't deserve to live. Anwar's crimes were particularly shocking. In 2009, while living with his girlfriend, he became the caregiver for her 2-year-old daughter, Sanam. Instead of protecting her, he inflicted weeks of torture and abuse. Sanam was beaten, burned, and deprived of food. When she finally succumbed to her injuries, doctors counted more than 100 separate wounds on her small body. Anwar was sentenced in 2010 to life in prison, with a minimum of 23 years inside prison. Anwar quickly became a target. Parr, serving life for a fatal stabbing, and Mann, a contract killer serving a life term for double murder. Both later claimed Anwar bragged about his crimes and showed no remorse. They decided to act. On February 15th, they lured Anwar into a vulnerable position inside their shared unit. Using makeshift ligatures fashioned from bedding, they strangled him until he was dead. Then they calmly reported what they had done to guards. During their trial, they openly admitted to the killing, saying they had rid the world of someone who delighted in harming children. Both Parr and Mann were convicted of murder in 2013 and handed additional life sentences. Neither man expressed regret. For much of the British public, however, Anwar's death inspired little sympathy. Comment sections and social media posts at the time echoed one sentiment: that justice had been served. Up next, one man turned into prison's self-appointed executioner, killing not one but two child predators with nothing more than a walking cane: David Bobb and Graham de Luis Conti. On January 16, 2020, at the California Substance Abuse Treatment Facility and State Prison in Corcoran, California, a violent sequence of events ended the lives of two convicted child molesters. Jonathan Watson, then 41 and already serving life without parole for a 2009 murder, picked up a cane and bludgeoned 48-year-old David Bobb and 62-year-old Graham de Luis Conti. Both men were serving life sentences for aggravated sexual assault of children under 14. Bobb died almost immediately, while de Luis Conti succumbed to his injuries 3 days later. Watson's placement in that unit was controversial. Just days earlier, officials downgraded his custody level, moving him from a higher security cell to dormitory-style housing. Watson protested the move, warning that he might lash out if kept in proximity to men he found intolerable. His frustration boiled over when Bobb repeatedly watched PBS Kids in front of other inmates, which Watson interpreted as mocking behavior. On the day of the killings, Watson told a prison counselor he needed to be moved back, warning that otherwise he might really mess one of these dudes up. The counselor dismissed him. Hours later, Watson saw Bob watching children's programming again. After another inmate made a remark, Watson declared, "I got this," and struck Bob with a cane until he was lifeless. Walking to confess, he saw DeLuis Conti, whom he described as a known child trafficker, and decided to attack him too, reasoning that he might as well do everybody a favor. In his confession, Watson positioned himself as society's unofficial executioner, calling child molesters every parent's worst nightmare, and emphasizing his unique position as a lifer with so little to lose. Prison officials launched an investigation, but an internal review cleared staff of wrongdoing. Citing insufficient evidence, they knowingly ignored a credible threat. While Watson claimed he was doing parents a favor, the next victim was so notorious, his murder made global headlines: John Johann. On August 23, 2003, one of the most infamous names in the Catholic Church abuse scandal was murdered in prison. John Johann, a defrocked priest whose case epitomized decades of abuse and cover-ups, was strangled and stomped to death in his protective custody cell at Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center in Massachusetts. His killer, 38-year-old lifer Joseph Druce, planned the murder meticulously, seeing Johann as a prize target. Johann had been ordained in 1962, but for 3 decades he preyed on children, with more than 130 victims eventually coming forward. His exposure by the Boston Globe's Spotlight team in 2002 brought international scandal and forced the Archdiocese of Boston to pay hundreds of millions in settlements. In 2002, Johann was convicted of indecent assault on a 10-year-old boy and sentenced to 9 to 10 years. Despite protective custody, he was still vulnerable. Druce, already serving life for a 1988 murder, had a history of violence and was himself a survivor of abuse. He told others he despised pedophiles and had been plotting Johann's murder for weeks. On the morning of August 23rd, Druce entered Johann's protective custody cell during an unlocked period, jammed the door shut with a paperback book, bound Johann's hands with a t-shirt, and used a pillowcase and shoelaces to strangle him before stomping on his chest. The entire assault lasted several minutes while guards remained unaware. When guards finally arrived, Druce immediately confessed. In court, he showed no remorse, telling jurors that killing Johann meant protecting other children. In 2006, he was convicted of first-degree murder and given a second life sentence for Massachusetts prison officials. The fallout was embarrassing. How could a high-profile inmate in protective custody be so exposed? 4 guards faced discipline, but no criminal charges. The killing occurred while over 500 civil lawsuits against the Boston Archdiocese remained pending, with eventual settlements reaching $85 million for 552 victims by 2005. Alan Ager. Shortly after 2 a.m. on April 6, 2010, officers at Salinas Valley State Prison discovered 63-year-old Alan Ager slumped in his bunk, a cloth ligature tightly bound around his neck and blood at his mouth. His cellmate, Clyde Leroy Beaver, serving life without parole for a 1979 murder, was attempting to hide Ager's body under a mattress when discovered by correctional officers. Ager was rushed to Salinas Valley Memorial Hospital but never regained consciousness. He was removed from life support and pronounced dead on April 16, 2010. The prison investigation and subsequent criminal prosecution concluded the death was a homicide by ligature strangulation. Beaver later pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and was sentenced to another life term without parole. Ager's life and prison trajectory explain why he was extremely vulnerable. Convicted in 2008 of continuous sexual abuse of a child under 14, Ager was a small man at 5'4" and 135 pounds, making him particularly vulnerable. At sentencing, he was in his 60s, small in stature, about 5'4" and 135 pounds, and repeatedly told staff he feared for his life. He appealed for protection, filed dozens of grievances, and alleged that custodial staff at times revealed the nature of his charges to other inmates, denied medical care, and declined single-cell placements despite clear fears. The months leading to Ager's death were marked by escalating violence and ignored warnings. He reported multiple physical assaults, including one incident in which an escorting officer broke his nose, and repeatedly wrote that he feared he would get killed out here. These pleas went unheeded, and he was housed with Beaver despite both men's violent histories and Ager's documented vulnerability. Around 2:20 a.m., Officer Spencer observed Beaver attempting to hide Ager under a mattress. Medics later found evidence consistent with ligature strangulation and ischemic anoxic encephalopathy. Ager lingered in a coma for 10 days before life support was withdrawn. The CDCR designated the death a homicide, and law enforcement pursued charges against Beaver, who eventually pleaded guilty in March 2011. The case became one piece of a larger investigative picture. A 2015 Associated Press study later found that California's inmate homicide rate ran roughly double the national average, with sex offenders comprising 15% of the population but nearly 30% of homicide victims. Ager's family filed a federal lawsuit alleging deliberate indifference to safety risks, but a judge ultimately ruled against them in 2014, finding no evidence of deliberate indifference by officials. While Ager's warnings went unheard, the next predator's death is still under investigation. His crimes were against his own family, and his cellmate may have delivered justice. Robert E. Cole. On April 4, 2025, at approximately 6:30 a.m., correctional officers performing a routine check at Mule Creek State Prison in Ione, California, found 48-year-old Robert E. Cole unresponsive in his cell. Staff began CPR and emergency procedures immediately, and paramedics were summoned. Cole was pronounced dead at 6:43 a.m. His cellmate, Justin P. Welsh, 36, serving an 18-year sentence for assault-related offenses, was immediately placed in restricted housing as the primary suspect. Cole's criminal history was particularly heinous, involving multiple victims within his own family. The former volleyball coach was convicted in 2019 of numerous sex offenses against 3 male relatives, including boys aged 10 to 18, with crimes including sodomy with a child 10 or younger and oral copulation with force on a child under 14. His life sentence without parole reflected the severity and scope of his offenses. Anyway, the circumstances surrounding Cole's death remain under investigation as of August 2025. The California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation classified the death as a suspected homicide and notified appropriate authorities. Justin Welsh's background suggests a pattern of violence that may have contributed to the incident. Convicted in San Bernardino County in 2023 of corporal injury and assault with a firearm as second strike offenses, Welsh had enhancements for inflicting great bodily injury in domestic violence cases. His 18-year sentence and arrival at Mule Creek in May 2023 placed him in proximity to Cole for nearly 2 years before the fatal incident. The case highlights ongoing violence issues at Mule Creek State Prison. The facility experienced 2 prior strangulation deaths during conjugal visits in late 2024 and early 2025, contributing to broader concerns about security and inmate safety. As of August 2025, the Amador County District Attorney's Office investigation remains open, with no charges filed or autopsy results publicly released. Meanwhile, commentary on social platforms ran hot. Many expressed little sympathy for Cole because of his crimes, while civil rights advocates warned that an inmate's heinous convictions cannot excuse failures in custody, classification, or oversight that allow deadly violence to occur. The CDCR statement and continuing press coverage underscore 2 simultaneous threads: the visceral public reaction to a convicted child predator's death and the policy questions raised whenever an inmate dies on state watch. Up next, we have a predator who tried to justify his crimes to his cellmate, until that very cellmate decided to set up the appointment with God himself. Theodore Dyer. On October 29, 2014, at Saginaw Correctional Facility in Michigan, a cellmate fight turned into murder. 67-year-old Theodore Ted Dyer, who had been serving a 25-50-year sentence for first-degree criminal sexual conduct involving a 9-year-old neighbor, was bludgeoned and then strangled in his cell. His cellmate, 51-year-old Stephen D. Sanderson, already serving life without parole for a 1991 first-degree murder, admitted to the killing and later pleaded guilty to second-degree murder. The attack was brutal and immediate. Sanderson knocked Dyer unconscious and used the victim's own shoelaces to strangle him, after which Dyer was pronounced dead later that day. Authorities treated the homicide as straightforward and publicized Sanderson's confession. Dyer's conviction stemmed from the sexual assault of a 9-year-old neighbor girl in Grand Haven, Michigan, with the abuse discovered when the victim's mother walked in on the assault. His claim that he and his girlfriend had adopted the child because they couldn't have their own was revealed as fabrication during his 2009 trial, leading to a 25 to 50-year sentence. Sanderson's violent background made him a dangerous cellmate for any vulnerable inmate. Serving life without parole for the 1991 first-degree murder of his girlfriend Sandy Sittner, whom he shot multiple times during an argument, Sanderson had previously warned prison staff not to house him with child sex offenders, stating he would kill them. These warnings went unheeded. So, Sanderson would knock Dyer unconscious with a blow to the head, then strangled him using his own shoelaces. About 12 hours after the killing, he confessed to Michigan State Police detectives, expressing no remorse and stating, "Ted got what he deserved." During his February 2015 court appearance, Sanderson reiterated his lack of regret. "The reason I killed him was because he was a child molester." He clarified he wasn't judging Dyer, but setting up the appointment with God, a reference to the film Man on Fire that went viral online. Sanderson's guilty plea to second-degree murder earned him another life sentence with parole eligibility, consecutive to his existing term. Judge Fred L. Borchard noted the meaninglessness of the sentence, as Sanderson would effectively need to die and come back to life to serve the consecutive term. Joseph DeSisto. On November 5, 2024, inside the Arizona State Prison Complex, Tucson, an 81-year-old man named Joseph Michael DeSisto was found dead in his cell. Prison officials reported it as a natural death, but his cellmate, 61-year-old Ricky Kurt Wassenaar, claimed otherwise. Wassenaar, already infamous for orchestrating the longest prison standoff in Arizona history back in 2004, insisted that he had strangled DeSisto. His confession directly contradicted the official ruling, setting off a storm of doubt and speculation. DeSisto was convicted in 2022 on 12 counts involving the repeated sexual abuse of his step-granddaughter from 2017 to 2020, with crimes including molestation, sexual conduct with a minor under 15, and continuous sexual abuse. The abuse was reported after the victim emailed her teachers for help via her school-issued computer, prompting intervention. Wassenaar's criminal history made him an exceptionally dangerous cellmate. 2 decades earlier, he had led a siege at Lewis Prison, taking guards hostage for 15 days. Over the years, he repeatedly told officials not to house him with child molesters, warning that he would kill them. His threats were ignored. According to Wassenaar, on November 5th, he strangled DeSisto using an arm lock and his bare hands. He claimed he smeared suntan lotion on DeSisto's neck to ensure his DNA would be found, then called for medical help. DeSisto was taken to a hospital and pronounced dead, but when the Pima County medical examiner performed the autopsy, they ruled the cause of death natural. They argued that his broken ribs came from CPR attempts, not violence. Despite his confession, prosecutors declined to charge Wassenaar. Officials stood by the autopsy, leaving the case technically closed, yet Wassenaar continued to tell his story to journalists, reform advocates, and anyone who would listen. Prison reform advocate Donna Ham repeatedly warned ADCR director Ryan Thornell about Wassenaar's threats, but her emails were ignored. Months later, in April 2025, he killed 3 more inmates, proving his threats weren't idle. The outcome left haunting questions. Did DeSisto die of natural causes, or did Arizona cover up a murder to avoid admitting its failures? Either way, his death remains emblematic of the dangers faced by elderly sex offenders behind bars, and of a prison system where truth is often murky. Robert Fisher and William Brand. On October 22, 2024, 34-year-old Robert Fisher, recently sentenced for the abuse and murder of 3-year-old Josephina Cunningham, was found dead at 1:50 a.m. at Elmira Correctional Facility in New York. Just over an hour later at 2:52 a.m., William Brand, 59, also a convicted child sex offender, was found dead in the same facility. Fisher's crimes were particularly brutal and involved betrayal of trust. While babysitting 3-year-old Josephina in July 2023, Fisher admitted to drugging her with diphenhydramine, sexually assaulting her, and causing her death by blunt force trauma and asphyxiation. His September 2024 sentencing to 20 years to life came just 5 weeks before his death. Brand was serving a 10-year sentence for second-degree course of sexual conduct against a child under 13, with his 2017 conviction making him eligible for parole in 2026. The proximity of both deaths raised immediate suspicions of coordinated violence or systematic targeting. The investigation has been marked by unusual secrecy and delayed information release. A heavily redacted incident report obtained through Freedom of Information law requests in April 2025 provided minimal details, omitting crucial information such as witness statements or security footage. The state requested extensions for additional records, citing ongoing review needs. The New York State Department of Corrections initially classified both deaths as unusual and launched internal investigations with assistance from state police. However, as of August 2025, no updates indicate resolutions, charges, or identified suspects, leaving questions about potential foul play unanswered. Public reaction to the deaths was largely unsympathetic, with many viewing them as informal prison justice. Social media posts celebrated Fisher's demise, with comments like, "Dead pedophiles don't re-offend," reflecting common attitudes toward such cases. And while those deaths remain unexplained, the next case is crystal clear. A serial killer of more than 70 girls was stabbed to death in prison by the relative of one of his victims, Daniel Camargo Barbosa. On November 13, 1994, in Quito, Ecuador, Daniel Camargo Barbosa, one of the deadliest child predators in history, was murdered in his prison cell. At age 64, the man who had abused and killed scores of girls across Colombia and Ecuador was stabbed to death by another inmate, reportedly the nephew of one of his victims. Barbosa's early life was marked by severe abuse that may have contributed to his later crimes. Born in 1930 in Colombia, he was raised by an abusive stepmother who frequently humiliated him by forcing him to wear girls' girls' clothing to school, leading to relentless bullying. Despite this trauma, he excelled academically with a reported IQ of 116 and became well-read, citing authors like Gabriel Garcia Marquez and philosophers like Nietzsche. His criminal career began with a partnership that revealed his obsessions. In the early 1960s, Barbosa worked with a woman named Esperanza to lure young girls to an apartment, drug them with sleeping pills, and abuse them, specifically targeting virgins. This pattern of targeting virginity became central to his later murders. After his arrest in 1964 and release in the early 1970s, Barbosa committed his first known murder in 1974, killing a 9-year-old girl to prevent her from reporting his abuse. This murder in Colombia led to his conviction and imprisonment on Gorgona Island, known as Colombia's Alcatraz. Barbosa's 1984 escape from Gorgona Island was meticulously planned, using navigation knowledge gained from prison library books to cross dangerous waters in a makeshift boat. Authorities presumed him dead, with media reports claiming he was eaten by sharks, allowing him to operate freely in Ecuador. His Ecuador killing spree was systematic and brutal. From December 1984 to February 1986, Barbosa confessed to killing 72 young girls, primarily poor victims aged 9, 12, all virgins, whom he lured with job offers before abusing and murdering them in remote locations. His victims were often dismembered and left for scavengers. Barbosa's capture in February 1986 came after the murder of Elizabeth Telpes, when police found him carrying her bloody clothes and a copy of Dostoevsky's Crime and Punishment. His calm confession and cooperation in locating undiscovered bodies demonstrated his lack of remorse. Despite confessing to 71 murders in Ecuador alone, Barbosa received only a 16-year sentence, the maximum allowed under Ecuadorian law at the time, highlighting inadequacies in regional justice systems. He claimed a Christian conversion during imprisonment, but showed no genuine remorse for his crimes. Juan Pablo Villanueva. Juan Pablo Villanueva, 53, serving life for aggravated sexual assault of a child under 14, was found strangled in his cell at North Kern State Prison on February 24, 2023, just 22 days after his arrival. His cellmate, serial killer Ramon Escobar, confessed to the killing, allegedly over hygiene issues. Villanueva's conviction in Los Angeles County Superior Court of aggravated sexual assault under California Penal Code Section 269 earned him a life sentence with parole possibility on October 25, 2022. Details of his specific crimes remain largely private due to victim protections and the non-notorious nature of his case. His extremely brief incarceration period highlighted dangerous housing decisions. Villanueva was placed in NKSP's reception center for assessment before permanent assignment, sharing a cell with Ramon Escobar, who was serving life without parole for multiple murders committed in Texas and California. Escobar's crimes included bludgeoning homeless individuals in Los Angeles and Santa Monica during a 2018 killing spree. The discovery came during a routine security check at 8:49 a.m. when a correctional officer found Villanueva unresponsive in his shared cell. Despite immediate life-saving measures and medical transport, he was pronounced dead at 9:03 a.m. The Kern County Coroner's Office autopsy determined the cause of death as ligature strangulation, with Escobar allegedly confessing to a prison staffer with the words, "I killed him." The stated motive of poor hygiene habits seemed insufficient given the fatal outcome, raising questions about deeper tensions or prison dynamics. Kern County District Attorney Cynthia Zimmer charged Escobar with first-degree murder and assault by a prisoner serving a life term in September 2023. Up next, we have another predator who met his end not in silence, but in a prison workshop, beaten to death with a rock and a sock by an inmate who called himself an enforcer. Sidonio Eugenio Teixeira. On June 20, 2016, Sidonio Eugenio Teixeira, 59, was fatally assaulted during a prison workshop at HMP Long Lartin, suffering severe head injuries from multiple blows with a rock concealed in a sock. His attacker was Victor Castigador, already serving a whole life sentence for the 1989 Human Torch murders. Teixeira was serving life with a minimum of 23 years for murdering his 3-year-old daughter and attempting to murder his 9-year-old son, crimes that occurred around 2006. His 2007 guilty plea avoided a full trial, but placed him among the most reviled inmates in the prison system. Castigador, a 61-year-old Filipino national, was already serving a whole life sentence for dousing 2 security guards in white spirit and setting them alight during a 1989 Soho robbery. His decision to target Teixeira stemmed from a long-running dispute and his self-appointed role as an enforcer. The attack occurred during what should have been a supervised activity period. Castigador used a rock taken from a fish tank, concealing it in a sock to create a makeshift weapon, and struck Teixeira Teixeira multiple times in the head. The assault was discovered by prison staff, but Teixeira was pronounced dead at the scene. Castigador showed no remorse, telling officers Teixeira was a horrible man and a bully, and that he would kill him again if possible. He was immediately charged with murder and pleaded guilty on September 23, 2016. At his October 2016 sentencing at Birmingham Crown Court, Mr. Justice Haddon Cave imposed another whole-life tariff, noting Castigador had set himself up as an enforcer and stating it was not his role to punish evil. Thanks for watching. Please check out more interesting videos from the cards on the screen.